Hello and welcome to A Grain of Sanderson, a podcast where we are foolishly attempting to read all of Brandon Sanderson's works in publication order. I am joined by Taylor Lane.
Hello.
And Jack McLaughlan.
Hello.
We are just finishing reading, for me this morning, Alcatraz versus the Knights of Crystallia. I only had to do the epilogue this morning, don't even worry about it. But this is the most Harry Potter coded of these books.
It's
really?
the most it feels like it's intentionally trying to make fun of Harry Potter, and therefore it's like about Harry Potter a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm sorry that's like where we're starting this, because it is unfortunately going to come up a lot during this episode. Because like,
yeah, trigger warning, Harry Potter.
Yes, trigger warning, J.K. Rowling. So,
wow, that's actually interesting. I didn't catch that at all. I thought this was incredibly like Warbreaker.
No, I see that too, just by virtue of it being like
highly political for no reason. Well, yeah. Warbreaker was political for a reason, but I thought that this was strangely political and out of place for a super high adventure kind of thing that has been happening.
We'll get way more into it on the actual episode, but I've already told both of you that my general impression of the book was I was actually really bored for the first 2/3, and then suddenly it became super exciting and genuinely like probably top 3 like Sanderson like climaxes of a story for me.
Of that we've read so far, or just in general? That's actually hard because it's up. There's definitely a recency bias going on right now, but like, okay. I really like the climax, specifically the climax involving Himalaya and Folsom. I really liked it. That one I saw coming and I was really excited about.
I didn't see coming until like a paragraph before it happened. I didn't see coming until Alcatraz said, "Wait, I'm a Smedry," and then like I was like, that's when I made the connection. I was like, wait.
Yeah, we'll get to that in our summary. Good new characters being introduced here.
Yeah. Right before we get going, though, I just want to do a quick shout out to 2 of my friends and listeners who this might be their first time listening to an episode not while on the Appalachian Trail, and actually sitting somewhere warm and with food that is not soup. Oh, perfect. Shout out to Katie and Christian, 2 good friends of mine from Madison. Welcome back to civilization.
We could also refer to them exclusively by their trail names, if you know their trail names.
Something Bangable and...
Oh my god.
Fiery Pants? No, it's like Fiery Pants. I need to double check.
Okay.
I know it came because she like burned a hole in her pants by sitting too close to the fire.
Great.
All right, what are our 1-sentence summaries?
My 1-sentence summary is, for the past 2 books, I have been begging for some interaction with the real world, and now that we finally have some interaction with the real world, I'm mad it's here.
Yeah, take me back.
Take me back.
Oh, also, eat your heart out, Graham. They name dropped going to the Library of Congress in book 5.
Yeah,
I think I remember you saying you were hoping they were going to do that.
No, I was just like, that's the logical like final boss area. Although we did also get another thing that I called, but we'll get to that.
My 1 sentence is Harry Potter is a bad book and the power of love always hits hard.
It's pretty good. My 1-sentence summary is, for a book being called The Knights of Crystallia, we learned very little about the actual Knights of Crystallia.
Yeah.
I was disappointed by that.
Mine was going to be really similar, and then you said that was going to be your 1 sentence, so I was like, Yeah.
It's hard out here.
Yeah.
I guess I loved the second book so deeply that I think I'm a little disappointed, I'll say, in this book.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad book, but it does not have nearly as much sauce as the previous one.
I think that the sauce came with cutting out Bastille for half of it.
Yeah,
that's actually no. I didn't.
That's one of my notes.
She is 100% like this. Like he yes, it's from Alcatraz's perspective, but at this point, it's like like, Bastille's a main character. Like, it's a dual main character book.
It's Alcatraz and Bastille.
And Bastille, and it's their stories together with it, which makes it the sauce. And I think the parts I loved about the last book were all the parts where we were learning to trust Bastille, and Bastille was learning to trust us, and it was like, you know.
You're absolutely right. What I was just about to say, like, that lines up really well with what I was just about to say, which was, I can imagine myself rereading Alcatraz versus the Scrivener's Bones. I can imagine myself rereading the last third of this book, like just literally skipping to when they go to the Royal Archives, which coincidentally is right when Bastille re-enters the narrative.
I know. It's
not a library, by the way.
Not a library.
Not a library.
Not a library.
You know, at first the joke was like, oh, whatever, this is an Alcatraz joke. But it went on for so long that it turned funny. It got absurd, and then it became funny.
My favorite part, so for the listeners, every time they met, the Royal Archives are an important point, but because these are the Royal Archives in the Free Kingdoms, every time someone says the Royal Archives, someone chimes in to remind it's not a library.
There's also a great beat where Alcatraz is just thinking about the Royal
That's
Archives,
what I was going to bring up.
And then Sig reads his mind and goes, not a library.
No, it's like, it's in the internal narration, and then Sig goes, not a library, and Alcatraz goes, what? And he's just like, just in case you were thinking it.
Yeah, that is a good running joke. There's a fantastic comedy special done by James Acaster, where there are, at the beginning of the special, there are jokes that are just not very funny, but he keeps calling back throughout this special called Repertoire. So by the time of like starting with hour 1 of this special, it's a joke that's not very funny, but when he's doing it as a callback in the 4th 1 hour special, and he's calling back 3 hours to a joke he did hours ago, it's the funniest thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Do we want to get to the summary so we can like really dive in?
Book 3 in the Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarian centers around stopping a treaty that will give up a piece of the Free Kingdoms, where Alcatraz's family is from, to the librarian-controlled Hushlands, where we, the readers, live, such as the Americas, Asia, all the continents we know. This book is far more political than other installments. In the first scene, Derulin's bag causes an explosion that takes down the giant glass mech that they are riding on. But all is well when we make it to the Smedry estate for the first time, and Alcatraz learns he is royalty, and whatever he decrees is legally binding, specifically that he can marry people. Then we go with the crew to the main palace, where we learn more about this treaty. There we learn that the king of Nahala, the country that we were in, is actually Bastille's father, solving the mystery of Bastille's lineage and revealing that she grew up as a princess. Grandpa Smedry tasks Alcatraz with meeting Falso, another Smedry, who we find out pretty quickly is in love with a librarian who turned to the good side named Himalaya. The crew joins a actual party that is happening in the castle, and Alcatraz spots his evil librarian mother in disguise. Alcatraz decides to follow her, and sees that she mysteriously disappears around the Royal Archives, not a library. When Alcatraz makes it back, Grandpa Smedry informs Alcatraz that they are, of course, already late for Bastille's hearing. They introduce transporter's glass, a kind of technology that can swap 2 items of the exact same size when activated at the same time. So there are 2 boxes of the exact same size in the Smedry Palace and in the Knights of Crystallia headquarters, and all Grandpa Smedry had to do was set up an appointment to swap them. At the hearing, Alcatraz defends Bastille. We meet 3 knights who are in charge of the Knights of Crystallia: an old man, Bastille's mother, Derulin, and a handsome young knight named Archides, who could also be Archides? I don't know. Archides? I'm saying Archides because I think that rolls off the tongue better.
Sure. I mean, that's like the closest to the Archimedes riff that it is.
Yeah.
Archides. Bastille is sentenced to a 2-day expulsion from the Mind Stone, a magic stone that connects all of the Knights of Crystallia to each other, a kind of shared collective skill set that every knight can tap into. Kind of like a less intense, mind-controlling version of a hive mind. Alcatraz then decides to take the crew to check out the Royal Archives. It turns out...
library.
It turns out the archives are just mountains and mountains of unorganized books due to the Free Kingdomers' fear of librarians. So they find Himalaya to help them find which book Alcatraz's mother, Shasta, might be looking for. They find it, but just when that happens, librarian agents burst in. Alcatraz helps his crew escape the librarians, only to find out that they had actually transported the royal archives with a teleporter glass to a new librarian-controlled location. Shasta thinks she has won, the crew entirely restrained, and the librarians all too happy to kill the traitor librarian among them. With a burst of inspiration from Bastille saying she believes in him, Alcatraz declares Folsom and Himalayan married, therefore giving Folsom Smedley's talent to Himalaya, which allows them to escape. But they still have a treaty to stop. Just when the king, Bastille's father, is about to sign the treaty, Alcatraz and his crew bust in and reveal the true plot the librarians were after. All of a sudden, the Mind Stone is entirely disabled, knocking out every Knight of Crystallia with one action. All but Bastille and the lying Knight of Crystallia, the handsome knight from before Arcades. Bastille, in a show of strength and determination, beats Arcades and saves the day. In the epilogue, Alcatraz's absent father reveals that through his research, he learned how the Smedley bloodline acquired their talents and claimed he could now give talents to everyone. There is also a subplot about him letting fame get to his head that is entirely irrelevant, so I didn't include it.
I disagree that's entirely irrelevant. I think it's relevant to the character side of the story, but it doesn't have anything to do with the plot, but it's an important.
I think if it has nothing to do with the ending, then whatever.
This is also this is the reason Jack and I are talking about Harry Potter, is that specific beat.
Really?
Yeah, because that's the Harry Potter beat.
Also, before we even get to that, one thing I definitely want to call right now, because Alcatraz's father is now like, we could give the Smedley talents to everyone. He's definitely going to be the villain by book 5.
Oh, I mean, I want that so badly to not be true. He keeps doing things that are like him being an absent father, and I keep writing in every margin, I really hope he's not evil, because, there are little kids out there with just, absent fathers who are not secretly evil. They are just bad fathers. I really want him to just be a bad father.
I sort of agree. I agree with that. And also, God, the parent thing is still my favorite part of these series. The dynamic with the parents. But we talked way back on book 1 when we discovered that Shasta was actually his mom. And also we learned a little bit about the talent being losing things. And I remember we had all these conversations and theories about the reason his dad abandoned him is probably because he's scared of losing him, or the mom has that same fear as well, and all of this stuff. And we are talking about all these theories involving what we think might happen with the mom near the end of the book, where I personally was saying I think she's a Darth Vader figure, where she is actually evil, but she still loves her family, and that will make her turn to the good side near the end or whatever. We talked about her intentionally losing in the first book to let Alcatraz get away.
Mm-hmm.
And then after this book, I really think what it's going to be is that it's not that both his parents love him. I think the flip is going to be that his dad is just a shitty person. And the dad, the hero, the one that's the hero of the Free Kingdoms, that was the one Alcatraz put all this time to save, all that stuff, is actually the parent that does not care about him. While Miss Fletcher, Shasta Smedley, the one who, while on the evil librarians team, was the one that was in his life the whole time. And then there was that moment with the Truthfinder's glass where she said, I don't care about, when she said, I don't care about Alcatraz, and Alcatraz was able to see through his Truthfinder lens that she was lying about that. I am so hype for the complicated mess of Shasta is actually on the evil librarian side. She's just on it because she thinks this is what's best for Alcatraz, because she actually does really love him compared to his father, who is consumed by... His father is the person who let the Harry Potter fame get to him compared to Alcatraz, who's trying to fight it.
That's something we definitely want to talk about.
Yeah. That scene with Shasta,
my
heart broke entirely for Alcatraz, because he was told his whole life one thing, and he was denied this thing that he wanted so badly, which is your mother's love. I don't think that that's unreasonable to want very badly, and to find out that it's like a lot more complicated. I was like, give this little boy a rest. Like, give this boy a break. I felt my heart was so broken for him. I wanted to just give him a hug.
And this happening in the same day he had that, like, request for love rejected by his father.
Absolutely.
I would also like to point out, just with Shasta losing things, I fucking called it. She lost a tail. And, like, that is a thing that happened. She's being tailed by Alcatraz, and she loses the tail.
I didn't even pick up on that. No, wait, you're absolutely right.
Wait, what?
She's being tailed by Alcatraz, but they're following behind it, and she loses the tail. They have no idea how she managed to do this swap. It's her Smedry talent kicking in. She lost a tail, and I fucking called that would happen. Let's go.
No. And the whole love of Paris thing. This is tying into the whole fame subplot really mattering. Is because it's a contrast with this whole parent thing. Like, he's getting this love and affection from these people, and he realizes that's not the real thing. That's not the substantial love. That's not the love that I actually want and need. And instead, what he actually wants and need is hidden in this really complicated mess with his parents.
Yeah.
I just wanted to read this comment from Josh. Reading Alcatraz Book 3, and it's funny how Sanderson graduated from light pot shots at Harry Potter to making a full-on theme in this book. Alcatraz immediately letting the boy who lived style fandom go to his head because of his desperate loneliness is a good beat.
Yeah.
I think that also this book really revealed some icky things about Grandpa Smedry that I didn't love. Alcatraz goes to Grandpa Smedry, and he, like, tells him about how Grandpa Smedry, like, shames him for, like, wanting fame and love. And I just can't put myself in Grandpa Smedry's shoes where I would be.
It's also worth noting that Grandpa Smedry hits him.
Oh my god! My heart broke 100 times in this book. I just was like, give this boy a break, because Grandpa I cannot put myself in Grandpa Smedry's shoes, where I'm looking at my grandson, who is not loved by either of his parents, and decides myself, you know what? He's not tough enough, kid. I'm also not going to give him that love he desires, like, unconditionally. Like, I just tell him you're proud of him. Like, is that so hard?
I think I read that scene in a way that's still kind of heartbreaking. I think I read it a little differently. And just to clarify for readers who didn't read, when we say hits him, it was very much meant to be a, like, snap him out of, like it was one of those, like, snap out of it slaps, but still it's the grandpa slapping.
You're still hitting a child.
That's the thing, right? Yeah, that, like, intention versus what actually ended up written on the page. Yeah. But I very much read it as because, and I think this gets called out kind of directly, is that, like, Alcatraz's father is, like, the super famous, like superstar, rock star, everybody loves all this stuff, like, let him get to his head. So I very much read it as Grandpa Smedry had one son who completely let the fame go to his head in a way that led to a lot of really bad lifestyle choices and events in his life. And Grandpa Smedry is now looking at his grandson going down the same path. So it's still heartbreaking, but I read it as heartbreaking as, like, Grandpa Smedry is so desperate for Alcatraz to not become another Attica.
Yeah. That's how I read it as well. And also, I do think that, like, generally telling people that they should not seek fame is good wisdom. Like, fame is never going to make you happier if you're already an unhappy person. And, like, true fame on, like, the level that you and, like, the three of us can never understand, that to me has always seemed like so horrific. Anything to prevent someone from having to go through that, I think, is good and noble. However, Grandpa Smedry, don't hit your children, please.
I mean, it's honestly, there's, like, a generational pattern here too, because, like, if I can see from that perspective as well, where Grandpa Smedry is looking at his grandson, letting the fame get to his head, but has still not learned the lesson, because it's very clear that Attica also has, like, deep daddy issues from Grandpa Smedry. Like the daddy issues go real deep. And
he was always late to my recitals.
Like, and it's also honestly heartbreaking that Grandpa Smedry still has not learned that the way that someone doesn't let fame get to their head is just by showering them with unconditional love. Like, why have you, like rejecting this boy is going to make it so much worse. And
the way
just like your son, just like what happened with your son.
Yeah, the way he tries to teach Alcatraz the lesson is he had given Alcatraz. Well, technically, this is the lens Alcatraz found in book 2, the one that was like embedded in the tomb of Alcatraz the First. Grandpa Smedry gives to him and tells him, "Oh, this is a truth finder lens. Like, you can see, if you're looking through it, you can see if people are lying." And that's the way Grandpa Smedry tries to teach him the lesson about fame, is like, Alcatraz ends up with this, this group of groupies, like a bunch of like teenagers and other kids that are following him around because he's famous, and like hitting him with accolades and like talking him up, blah, 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 most popular kid in school. And Grandpa Smedry's strategy is like, go back there and like keep your truth finder lens on you. And Alcatraz goes back to all of his new friends, which are new friends, and sees that they're all lying when they say like they're excited to see him and like keeping him with praise and stuff. Like, they're only there for his fame, which is like, man, what a bad day for Alcatraz, really. Like,
I know.
Yeah. I would also like to point out that both you and Brandon Sanderson, groupie has like a more specific context, and the fact that you're using it for like these relatively normal people who are just interested, like for normal fans, is sort of like,
Listen, it's fine.
It's more, whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at that point, especially when Grandpa Smedry smacks him, I think after this, I wrote down, I was like, he's going to go looking for validation somewhere. I think it turns out the only safe place he has left is Bastille. Like, honestly, like, who is, like, where is he's gotten...
Wait.
It's Bastille. Like, I was like, that's it. And it's like, is that the best...
You just gave me a thought.
Like, validation from?
You just gave me a thought. So when we were reading, so during the climax where they're in the librarian controlled territory and Alcatraz is realizing he needs to be a hero and what it means to be a hero, I wrote down, I bet he's going to get left behind in the librarian territory when everyone else escapes, and then the next book is him like with his mother as a prisoner of the librarians, and that's going to be a big part of next book. That didn't end up happening. But combining the two thoughts, what if the place he gets validation is from his mother, and then there is a little bit of a turn to the dark side plot in the future?
I mean, I can definitely see that happening with...
My clairvoyant power is activated, and I now know the ending. I haven't gone and confirmed it, but I know what the ending is going to be.
Make your called shot. Do it. Record it.
Here's the thing. I'm so sure I'm right. I'm not sure I want to make the called shot. A couple things that gave me the called shot. One, Alcatraz keeps talking about betraying someone. And then there's a chapter interlude where this whole book, the sort of running gag is Alcatraz is talking about how awesome he is as opposed to how awful he is in the previous two books. Because he's like, I want to annoy you by doing this. But
like, I want you to understand that I'm a bad person, and my new strategy is to annoy you and
is to seem narcissistic and annoying and all these things. He eventually drops this facade in sort of a late chapter, and he goes, "I killed him," and says, "I am a murderer." I am guessing he's going to Alcatraz's dad is going to have some sort of master plan to give everyone Smedry talents. And we are going to have to prevent this for some reason. In the prevention of this plot, Alcatraz's dad is going to die. And because of that, like, Alcatraz is going to think he's a murderer. And that is the reason that the 6th and final book in the series is going to be written by Bastille, because Alcatraz is, like, too upset by his dad dying to finish the book series.
I also want to call out, because this was also one of my favorite parts of the book. I think this is in the same interlude. It's on page 540 of my book copy, which obviously is going to be a little wild. And this is Alcatraz talking to the audience. And you all are to blame for this, in part. This is what your adoration does. You create yourselves heroes using our names, but those fabrications are so incredible, so elevated, that the real thing can never live up to them. You destroy us, consume us, and I am what's left over when you're done. Which, that line was so intense to be in this middle grade book. That was my main reaction to it. It was just such a...
That's the payoff to me of the fame plot. And that, I really like that beat.
My reaction was wondering if Sanderson, now a mega author of fantasy, I mean, top of the top, I wondered if that's how he feels. That he can't... I mean, he wrote this book, he was a smaller author, but...
It's important to remember that at this point in time, he's not mega famous yet.
I know, but I think I was just speculating, if he were to read this again, I wonder if he still... If he has a different perception of fame now that he's literally experienced it.
Now that he literally has people hanging on to his every word, like the word of God about this whole fantasy universe.
And in the context of what we are doing, Brandon Sanderson is not famous until next month, or in the grand scheme of things, next year, where he writes the first Wheel of Time book. And this, when it's announced that he's taking over the Wheel of Time, he's a little more famous when his name is on one of these books. That's what puts him firmly in superstardom. And you know what? I think this is probably the level of fame that Sanderson is most comfortable with, I would say, because he still has never received a major adaptation. We never get a Mistborn animated series. We never get there's never been a movie, and
he's been on and off in talks about a movie for the last decade. It's been it's never materialized, but it's been in the works, in the talks for a long time.
Well, I mean, his works are so broadly unadaptable for live action that what you would need is give this to the Castlevania studio, give Stormlight to the Castlevania studio, or
please, that's all I need in life.
Or maybe even Studio Trigger, and give them the Edge Runners treatment. Something like that. I do think the Castlevania studio would be most suited, especially to Mistborn and Stormlight. If he ever reaches that level of fame with an adaptation, it'll be interesting. I also wonder if we would get more popular if adaptations started emerging. Because, again, I mean, we'll be done with this in 2028, so there's still plenty of time for an adaptation to be made in that 4 years.
That's so much time.
Oh, also, just speaking of how much time is passing, so something I realized, we're going to read the next book in February. And then the next book after that, we read in summer of 2026.
I was also noticing that.
Yep.
Oh, because there's such a huge gap between 4 and 5.
Okay.
Yep, because 4 is written in, let's see. 4 comes out 2010. And then book 5 doesn't come out until 2016.
Wow. And Bastille is
2022.
Yeah, no. Oh, my babies. I'm going to miss them.
Yeah, I'm going to miss them a lot.
What do we want to talk about, next?
We talked a lot about... Do we want to jump into the Harry Potter topic? Because Graham and I at least probably have a lot to say about that.
I don't know if we have more to say than what we've already discussed, though.
I think we kind of talked around it a little bit. The basic point is that... Well, I have... To my mind, there are two major, critiques of Harry Potter in this story. And then there's a couple, random references that are just funny jabs. But, there's two major critiques. So anyone who hasn't read or familiar with Harry Potter, a big part of Harry Potter is that Harry Potter is the boy who lived. He enters this mysterious, magical world, and he's already world famous, super rich, all the stuff, no idea. This book does the exact same thing. Alcatraz gets to the Free Kingdoms, and everybody knows him. There are books written about him, both real historical books and also books that are fantasy, here's a story about what Alcatraz is up to in the Hushlands or whatever, right? And people are taking photos of him. People want to talk to him. People want to interview him. He also is nobility and like super filthy, stinking rich. It literally is. It's like a 1-to-1 analog with Harry Potter. And in Harry Potter, his fame is never really addressed. It's kind of just, yeah, he's super famous. He deserves it. And also he has all this money for like, and it's like really helpful to the plot, but not actually like relevant. It's just kind of like, yeah, Harry Potter is super famous and it doesn't affect him at all. He just is. Everyone knows who he is.
I wouldn't say that's entirely true. I mean, like, it becomes more of a plot beat as you go along, and Harry seems deeply resentful of his fame, and that I think that is one of the things that is supposed to endear us to him, is like, oh, Harry's so down to earth, he doesn't like that he's famous.
Even though he's like lived in a cupboard and like, for all intents and purposes, would get really into the fame.
Yeah, the only time that Harry like seems to be like not antagonistic towards his fame is literally the first time we get to see him like do something famous, which is like he enters the pub in like Diagon Alley. People come up to him and are like, oh my god, and like are shaking his hand. And like there's a dude who comes up to him and he's like, I recognize you. You bowed to me in a shop when I was a child. And like that sort of thing. And like that's the first time where he's like, this is really weird, but I'm not opposed to it. And then when he talks to Hagrid about it later on, he's like, I'm not sure how to feel about this. And they sort of have a conversation about that. And from that point on, Harry has like an antagonistic relationship with fame. And that only gets worse throughout this going on, when I think Sanderson is positing correctly here that someone who has been unloved and vulnerable throughout their entire life would really seek this out, even though it would be damaging to them. And I think that's sort of the thesis statement of the fame here.
Yeah. And Taylor, did you have something you were going to say about that?
I thought that there was like a few moments where he thought he was hot shit in like either the something of fire,
Goblet of Fire,
or The Half-Blood Prince, which was my favorite book. He like starts getting a little bit of hot shit, and then he gets like smited down by like
I don't
Hermione.
remember those beats.
It's been a long time since I read the books. I don't remember the specifics. They will blend together to me.
Hermione was like, stop acting like hot shit, and that was that.
I reread the third one when the Shrieking Shack was doing that one, and that's like, of those books, I think the third one is the only one that, like, thinking back on, I'm like, that one's really good. Like, very few notes on that one.
I remember liking Order of the Phoenix, but apparently that is a minority opinion.
You also came to, like, not to give details of your life away, but you came to Order of the Phoenix, like, at exactly the right moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's why I liked The Half-Blood Prince, because I was, like, a junior in high school when I read them for the first time.
Yeah.
I was a sophomore in college when I read Harry Potter for the first time.
I first encountered Harry Potter when I was 5 years old. It is unfortunately a part of who I am.
Unfortunately. The other major Harry Potter beat I want to talk about is one of the biggest critiques, like most common critiques I see online with people talking about Harry Potter and like being really simplistic morality, is the whole like Slytherins are evil, Gryffindors are good kind of beat. Where it's this kind of like essentializing, put into camps, and a lot of missed opportunities to like really lean into like the idea of, well, these are ideologies, these are belief systems, and there can be people, like people can move over. There can be goodness and badness on both sides. And at the end of the day, people are people and are complex, and like putting them into these little essential boxes is not true to reality. So like, this whole story we have, the librarians are evil and the Free Kingdomers are good. And that is held very true, like through the first two books. And then this book introduces the character of Himalaya, who I hope we talk about more. I love her so much.
Best character in the book. Fucking love her.
Himalaya is a character who 6 months before the events of this book defected. She was a librarian and she got to the Free Kingdoms as part of like an ambassador group, and she defected. And, at first she was hanging out with Folsom Smedry because he was like kind of meant to spy on her to make sure she was, not doing any evil shit. And then they end up like kind of falling in love, and Folsom's just watching her to make sure she feels comfortable in Free Kingdom culture. But, they're going on picnics and going to restaurants and going to It's really cute. But the thing is, and that ends up being like the thesis of Himalaya, because for the most part, like the first time we meet her, she gets called out because she's like absentmindedly like organizing like mints on the table. And it's called out. It's like, oh, you're doing it again. You're like relapsing. Because it's treated as this whole, like, you're not a librarian anymore. Librarian ideals like organization are bad, so you need to step away from it. But then the climax of her story comes when her organizational skills are needed, and it's treated like a drug relapse at first, like the language they're using.
Yeah, it was bad.
It's really weird.
We can talk about that specific like section, but eventually she comes around to being like, no, I'm going to organize. And while she's organizing, because she has to organize like the Royal Archives, not a library, because they're like to find the books they need. And she goes on this whole rant where she's just like, this is silly. Like this idea of like, because the librarians are evil, rejecting every part of their ideology, every one of their beliefs as inherently evil and avoiding them. Like organization is not necessarily bad. Like there's room for some of the idea there's room for good librarians. There's room for librarians who do truly believe in the power of organization and order.
And this beat ends with her declaring herself, I am a good librarian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I'm not an evil one.
And also, it's also important to know that Himalaya gives this long, like, beautiful monologue about how she is a good librarian. But you have to remember throughout this entire book that she's doing it in a thick Boston accent.
Oh, right. Don't forget that part.
You have to remember that Himalaya has a thick Boston accent because, boy, the audiobook narrator would not let you forget that.
Really?
No,
yeah, he's actually doing a great job, but he gives Himalaya a very, like, thick Boston accent, and I'm so here for it. It's so funny.
It's also the first, like, American-raised character that, like, Alcatraz interacts with at all. Like, the first, like, also raised in the Hushlands character. Which is kind of like a neat thing. Like, it's a neat thing for him to, like, bond with her over a little bit. But,
yeah, they have a conversation in the ice cream parlor where they're offered a bandana sundae, or a bandana split. And she's like, yeah, they get some of the stuff wrong. And it's like, that's cute.
But like, I really especially love the description of while she's giving her a rant, described her as, like, looking like a Hindu goddess with multiple arms because she's just moving so fast and, like, organizing all of these books.
Well, I also have thoughts about that. But
I read it as just multi-armed. Like, she's moving so fast, it looks like she has multiple arms. But which I guess, like, the fact that her name's Himalaya, like, adds, like, another layer to that. But
exactly.
Did you guys? Did either of you see the illustrations? Jack, does your book have illustrations?
Mine didn't have illustrations.
Which
I totally forgot about. Neither the last two books did not have illustrations for me.
That's great.
And I opened this book and I said, oh my gosh. I wrote here, I was like, oh my gosh, she looks like a Hindu goddess. And then I got to the line that said she looked like a Hindu goddess. And I said, oh, never mind. I probably shouldn't have written that down.
and then just closing out the whole, like, you know, rejection of the very essentialist good and evil that Harry Potter does is also, like, you know, one of the main villains is a Knight of Crystallia. I mean, we don't know why he went bad. We never get that, which is its own problem and its own thing we can talk about. We never get, like, a thesis from him like we do from Himalaya. But, you know, one of the main villains turns out to be a Knight of Crystallia who, like, betrays the Free Kingdomers to side with the librarians.
Yes. Yeah, that's another, like, good beat. It's especially a good beat to put into a middle grade book of... Alcatraz has the thought of, like, oh, if there can be good librarians, there can be evil Knights of Crystallia. And, like, as he's watching Archides about to assassinate the king, who is Dartmoor. The other thing that you have written down in terms of Harry Potter is one of the antagonists is She Who Cannot Be Named. And this is one of the things that I did not like.
Oh, I hated this.
I thought it was cute because they said She Could Not Be Named. And Alcatraz thinks, like, oh, is it because, like, her name has power and there's some kind of curse associated with it? And then the response is just like, no, it's just no one can pronounce it.
Oh, I hated that.
I hated it, one, because it's just a real Indian mountain.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah, and that's the thing that got me really mad. For the record, She Who Cannot Be Name's name is Kenchenjunga Serik Chaka. which is not that hard to say. Like, it's kind of long, but it's not that hard to say. I'm probably butchering the Swedish mountain in her name more than I am the Indian mountain, because I practiced. But the thing is, this as a Voldemort riff is okay.
Right.
I think is, like, fine. But specifically, her having a racialized name that is so unpronounceable. And, like, granted, it's supposed to be for, like, the Free Kingdomers can't pronounce it. But I still don't like this beat. And this is, seeing it again here sort of reminded me, I was trying to articulate a point in our Scrivener's Bone episodes where something is being done there with the fact that Kilimanjaro is an African name. Now that we've had this again, it's really weird that our villains, our librarian villains, are getting mountains, names that are, like, racialized as names that people of color have. Or at least, like, are racialized in such a way where it's like, this name is Indian, Kilimanjaro is an African name. Because of this, it's allowing race to come into it's a way for our villains to be racialized in a way I don't love. Because otherwise, this book is so disconnected from the real world. Race really doesn't play into it. Although it does in this book as well, because we have to talk about the fact that, like, we really have to talk about the political situation eventually, because it's wild.
Wait, so I want to talk about that just a little bit, because, and I'm fully accepting that I might be wrong here, but I did notice that it's like, okay, yeah, so the character named Kilimanjaro is African. The character named Himalayan is, at least in the art, is depicted as what I assume is depicted to be like Indian or Nepalese, or just like from that general part of the world. At the same time, like, I'm inclined to lean into that's like a harmless racialization, because the alternative is like he's already started this bit of like naming characters after mountains, right? And then it becomes like, well, imagine he had a character named Kilimanjaro that was like a white guy from like Buffalo, New York.
No. That's not my problem. Not all of these characters are racialized in that way. Kilimanjaro is like a cyborg. I don't know what he is.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah. My objection is not specifically to, like, it's weird that Kilimanjaro, there's a black guy named Kilimanjaro. Like, if that was the problem, I don't think that would be my criticism to make. But I'm specifically talking about here where it's like the only time we get like real world race introduced here, it is one for villains, or it is for a weird colonial plot that we will get to. It's just...
That's true, I guess.
And again, I don't think Kanchenjunga, she who must not be named, is, like, Indian. She's not described as Indian.
She's the white lady in the depictions,
okay.
In the illustrations.
If in the illustrations she's a white lady, like, that makes sense. And also, like, yeah, she's, like, sort of she's, like, an evil Grandpa Smedry, is sort of how she's portrayed in the book. Yeah. At least, like...
She's a cute old lady that, like, is crocheting and knitting, but then she shows the knitting and it's like a skull. Like...
I think that there's a kind of colorblind, kind of, not casting, but, like, the Smedry line is completely filled with diversity that doesn't explain itself because it doesn't need to be explained in this book series. Like Singh is Polynesian, and then his other cousin is East Asian, and like they're really only the main bloodline or whatever is white. But I had something like I agree with you on the she who cannot be named thing, but it was in a little bit different way. I thought that, there would be children who read this book who have difficult to pronounce names for an English-speaking country. And I thought it was just so icky the way that it was handled. And I really had a lot of respect for Grandpa Smedry for being the only one who took the time to respect her enough to learn her name. I think that, like, I've heard, like, other people, like, none of us have, like, hard to pronounce names, but I've heard other people, like, talk about who do have, like, hard to pronounce names in English, saying, like, if someone learns your name, that's a sign of respect. Like, learning how to say someone's name correctly is showing that you respect them, and refusing to learn how to say someone's name correctly shows that you do not care at all about them. And, like, I get that she's supposed to be evil, but it just rubbed me the wrong way in, like, that the main cast was being icky in the wrong way. Like, they were being, like, kind of evil they were being evil in that sense where, like, I didn't want to see my main heroes doing that to someone. Like, I thought that you were supposed to be virtuous, and I wanted you to be heroic. And I didn't like the way that you treated this person's name just because their name's kind of long.
Yeah. And again, it took me maybe like 2 minutes to learn how to say that name correctly.
I know. I just thought for the little kids who were reading this who had hard to pronounce names, I was like, I don't know if that's what you should be. Like, they're gonna feel like, oh man, they're gonna feel bad, I think, about that, in a sense. Like, I don't know if that's, like, entirely funny to them.
Yeah. If we don't have more to say, I do kind of want to move on to, again, this is not entirely my criticism to make, so I will have only so much insight here, but the fact that Australia and Sing are, like, the only Smedries or, like, Free Kingdomers who really get racialized. And they're Polynesian adjacent, because they're not actually Polynesian. They are a fantasy Polynesian.
Except for one time where Sing is called Hawaiian.
Yes, that does happen. Sing is called Hawaiian at one point. So Mokia is like, this is so weird. So the political situation in this book is there's a war going on between the Free Kingdoms and the evil librarians, and they are currently conquering Mokia, and have just offered a peace agreement to say, hey, if you just peacefully give us Mokia and let us colonize it, we'll end the war right now. And
it's like withdraw your support from defending Mokia.
Yeah, which, like,
because it is said explicitly, like, Mokia would just keep fighting on its own, but then, it's alone.
Yeah, and it would lose is the implication. And there's only one bit of, like, grace where, like, Sing is sort of like, my people are still fighting. And it's weird that we get this beat of, like, all of these kings and, like, the Free Kingdoms seems to have representative oligarchy, as far as I can tell. Like, they
it's like all of the kingdoms join together, and then all of the people who were just kings of their kingdom are now, like, the members of this big parliament.
Yeah, and then they vote to elect a high king as well. And that's currently Bastile's dad, Dartmoor.
I do want to be clear, just in terms of framing, it is framed as, like, the decision for them to just, like, give up Mokia is framed as the bad thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's something where, like, you do have a moment where, like, Alcatraz thinks to himself briefly, wait, that might be a good idea, it ends the war. And then that's very quickly like, yeah, but we're talking about giving up a country to the, like, evil oppression. Like, we're talking about, like, consigning an entire nation of people to oppression and, like, all this stuff.
Well,
and then he, like, switches his mind and becomes, like, very, like, oh, wait, no, that makes total sense. Like, we got to stand up for Mokia.
Alcatraz comes around to that point eventually, but it's worth knowing that no one else does, or, like, the core cast does, because they're like, Mokia has to be saved because we like Sing, we like Australia. But it's important to know that the king, his objection to this is not that, like, it is Mokia, like, not saving Mokia here is wrong. His objection is, oh, the librarians have been duplicitous, and therefore this treaty is null and void. Like, he's not really objecting to the colonization of Mokia, which, again,
right. The treaty doesn't get canceled because they're convinced that actually this is a horrible thing to do. The treaty gets canceled because they learned that the librarians were lying and they had a secret plot the whole time. Like, so if it turned out the librarians were being honest, like, they would have gone forward with
I'm not objecting to this being in this book, or I'm not objecting this to being in any book. Like, all of these are fine things that you can put in a book. But I think it's interesting to put into a middle grade book, and particularly this series, which only has so many tools to engage with this sort of thing. And this book is putting colonialism into it, and then doesn't really have the tools to sort of really interact with that. And that's sort of where my note of, like, oh, the real world is here, and I don't like it, comes from.
I was also going to say that Quentin, and therefore Folsom, who's his brother, they are said to be some sort of East Asian. Like he is like either like Japanese, Korean, Chinese. Like they are.
Okay.
They that is explicitly said, and is shown in the art that I just showed.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Although actually, now that you bring that up, there is the other unfortunate beat that like, oh, the fact that his power is kung fu is kind of disappointing.
Wait,
then
that just kind of
just clicked for me too. Just because we never actually said it explicitly and it didn't come up in this summary. Folsom's talent is he's a really bad dancer, and what that means is the moment he hears any music, he starts dancing, which is like he uncontrollably, which he starts jumping into spin kicks and punching, and basically just beats up everyone around him. So that climax that we love so much, where it's like, because it's you get married, blah blah blah, like you get your spouse's smedgery talent. It's like they have everyone captured, and the librarians have discovered inhibitor glass, which if you put it on a smedgery, it's like their talents don't work. So even though there's music playing, because like a book with a music card in it opens up, Folsom's not like kung fuing their way out of it, and it's like Himalaya is like about to be killed, and Alcatraz declares Folsom and Himalaya. He's like, Folsom, do you love Himalaya? He's like, yes. Himalaya, do you love Folsom? She says yes. And he's like, then I declare you married. And suddenly Himalaya gets his talent, which is dancing poorly, and there's music playing, and she's not wearing any kind of inhibitor glass or anything because she wasn't the smedgery, and she jumps into action and kicks ass. And that's the thing. That's the scene like I'm like so in love with. I think it's so amazing and so fun.
It's really fun.
But
I love that scene.
But basically the talent is when music plays, he starts doing incredible kung fu on everyone around him.
Yeah. And again, I don't think Sanderson is putting in any of this because he is evil or racist. I think he's grown up in America, and like there are some assumed defaults that are not what they should be. Like there's literally a point in the book where he's talking about like the different kings who have showed up to this voting, and he's talking about them, and he's like, there's an African looking king who comes up in robes, there's a Polynesian king who's dressed in like Polynesian warrior's outfit, there's a king and queen who walks by who Alcatraz goes, they're wearing a standard crown and robe that you would see on a European king. And I'm like, yeah, that's a very big assumption, assuming that is the standard. And it like again, like
it is from Alcatraz's perspective.
It's from Alcatraz's perspective, but again, it's like an assumed default that I'm like, I don't love this, but also I'm not saying that like I am holier than thou either. Like I live in the United States. There are assumed defaults that I am biased to, but it's important that when they are here that we talk about.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, like I don't think it's like I wouldn't classify that as like a negative or failure of a book so much as a lack of a lack of taking an opportunity to kind of break down certain stereotypes.
Again, I don't think that it's the responsibility of this book to break down stereotypes, but if you're going to put these things into your book, it's important that you do it well. And I mean, to bring up the quote that we have at the beginning of all of our documents, our notes documents, when there are real world implications all around you, it's important to have the second thought. Mm-hmm. Shout out Natalie Watson.
Yeah.
I think that this actually leans into, if we don't have any more points on,
can we if we're gonna move on, can we take a quick bathroom break if we're gonna move on?
Yeah, let's take a bathroom break and then we'll come back in with Taylor's point. We're back. Despite the fact that we've probably been back for like 5 minutes.
That's okay.
Right.
Taylor, I believe you had a topic for us.
Yes. So we talked about a little bit about race, and I kind of wanted to talk about gender.
Ooh.
So we're at book 3. My topic of gender a lot is talking more about like the last 3 books that we've read so far. And something that really struck me reading this book is that being a librarian is a gendered profession, I would say. Can we agree with that?
In the real world.
In the real world.
Yeah,
yes.
It is.
If you think about a librarian, you think about women. And that's typically, like,
yeah,
how it's depicted and who is a librarian is a woman.
Yeah, we talked about it in the first episode how, like, the stereotype of librarians has changed since this is written, because I would say, like, the evil librarian of, like, a woman between, like, her 30s and 50s wearing horn-rimmed glasses was sort of, like, the default. Mm-hmm. And now, when I think of a librarian, I think of a young queer woman.
No, I was gonna say the coolest non-binary person you've ever met is like.
Yeah, exactly. A young queer person. Then.
yeah. So I just noticed in book 3 that, like, even though librarian is a very gendered profession, every bad guy has been a man, and that kind of, like, I don't know. I kind of got tired of that. The first book, Blackburn, was a male librarian. In the second book, Kilimanjaro, was a male librarian. And in this book, we have the BBEG, the big bad evil guy, turns out to not be a librarian. Still a man, though, for the Knights of Crystallia, but that doesn't really have to do anything with the point I'm making. But Shasta comes in, and she's kind of a larger librarian, like evil librarian or whatever, but, like, she still brings in this dark oculator who is a man to help her. Mm-hmm. And I was like, it would have been so easy to just like I don't know what point he's trying to make. Like, are we maybe he's trying to defend women and not make them out to be evil.
He might be intentionally trying to move away from the stereotype is the thing.
I don't know if that, like, is he trying to do that? Because then we just have a book that is almost entirely, like, there's not really that many women.
It's also worth noting that Kenshin Junka Sarakchaka, like, She Who Must Not Be Named, like, while she's said to be the villain of the book, she doesn't do anything in the entire book. Like, the most threatening thing she does is she knits a cool scarf. Or she knits a cool Afghan, specifically, is what it says.
I definitely wouldn't call her the BBEG of this book.
She's a villain, but not the villain.
Yeah, she doesn't get a cool fight scene and is treated with the same cool factor, respect, I think, that the other male adversaries are treated with.
Yeah.
Shasta's really carrying it on her back, and I need her to, like, step up. Like,
Shasta's still, like, the coolest character in this series.
Love Shasta.
She's still the most interesting
character.
Love
Shasta.
Yeah.
We referenced it earlier, but, like, oh my god, the scene where Alcatraz is wearing the truth-finding lenses when she says, like, I want to rule the world, and Alcatraz means nothing to me, and, like, he learns that she's telling a lie when she says that.
Yeah.
Like, we've got Himalaya. She's lit. Love her.
Himalaya is great.
Oh, I love her.
Himalaya's great. Bastille, perfect. No notes. And then the rest of the women are either pieces of shit or, like, ditzy and stupid. Like,
there was a line about Australia, like, she's smart but sometimes forgets to be smart.
Right. And I would put Darulin under the piece of shit category.
Yeah.
I do not, like, she's complex. Maybe we can, like, because that's kind of the point I had, really, was that, like, hey, let's pay attention to who is our main adversary here, because librarians are very gendered, and we have not had that representation. That was kind of my point. I feel like that's a good segue into talking about the parental situation, though, because of Darulin.
Yeah.
Oh, we haven't actually talked about Bastille in this book yet. It's a great transition.
Did anyone else have anything to say before we move on?
I have, like, some other points I want to bring up about other Smedries, but I'll save that. In terms of gender, like, that's an interesting point that I hadn't considered. Yeah. All right, let's talk about Bastille's parents.
Oh.
And I guess Attica, too.
This book, Darulin is one above Ellen for me at this point. It go, like, in order of, like, liking them. Like, Ellen's still 100% at the bottom. That guy sucks. Hate that guy. Darulin, when I catch you. When I catch you, Darulin.
Taylor is about to attack Brandon Sanderson and delete the memory of Darulin in his brain.
Alcatraz's father. Mm-hmm. His name's Attica. He is, neglectful, deadbeat. That's what I called him in my notes. Deadbeat, absent father. And, but that's just what he was, like, he didn't try to be something he wasn't. Whereas, like, Darulin I hated so deeply because there was just so many moments where I was like, Darulin, you failed your baby girl. Like, again, because, you know, we're a little bit older, I was not putting myself in the shoes of Bastille, I was putting myself in the shoes of Drulin and being like, you deeply, deeply failed your little girl on so many levels. And I know she was kind of a red herring in this book where we were kind of meant to think that Drulin was going to be the BBEG revealed to be evil kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that she wasn't made me hate her so much more deeply because, okay, let's just talk about what happened and why I hate her so much, is that, so basically there is this hearing with Bastille, and one night is like good cop, one night is like, and then like, but Bastille's mom plays the bad cop, where she's like, severe punishment, cut her off for a week, she can never be put back into the Knights of Crystallia. And then the actual evil guy is like the good cop, where he's like, he has like the lightest sentence or something like that, and then like it turns out to be somewhere in the middle. And like Bastille's like, oh, like she's just hard on me because like she wants what's best for me. And I was like, Drulin, that's your baby girl.
Yeah.
Like, that's your 13-year-old daughter. Why are you so mean to her? Like, you're supposed to, like, she has no one on her side. You're supposed to be on her side.
That's your 13-year-old daughter that was given the impossible task of, like, going into the field and, like, defending one of the most reckless Smedries in existence. And because she failed, which the metric for her failing was she lost her sword. Not that she failed to protect anybody. Just she lost her sword. And you have no sympathy, no ground to give, no... She does not stand up for Bastille in any way. And it just... again, so much of this book and my heart was just broken for these babies. Like... Oh, and Drulin doesn't get any kind of redemption either. There's no moment where she's like, actually, I understand that I was bad. The closest we get to redemption is that we see that she does have feelings, in the sense that, like, you know, she's married to King Dartmoor, and she clearly, and there's like little moments of like, oh, she's like a serious woman, but she does love this man. Like, she is like married to him and all that stuff. But that's like the most humanizing we get. We never get a moment of vindication for Bastille with regards to her mother. Like, Bastille has her moment where she's fighting Archides. She has her moment where she regains her, like, knighthood and all that stuff. But we never see her, like... We never see her... Yeah, we never see her mom be like, I was wrong, you're actually capable.
Yeah.
And, like, I think that the fact that the big reveal... Because we got, like, this... idea last book where, oh no, maybe somebody set her up for failure, and then we learned that Bastille's mom was on the council. The reveal there was that actually Archides put Bastille as a knight because he wanted her to fail so that Grandpa Smedry would die, not because he had any beef with Bastille, which to me just makes Drulin's perspective, like I said, just so much worse, because she wasn't even revealed to be evil. Like, she was just being really harsh on her daughter and setting up these impossible standards for her to, like, reach.
Yeah. What's fascinating is she's being set up with so many impossible things, and, like, Bastille, like, pushes herself to fucking meet it. And no one should have to have that burden put on them. But also, it is fucking awesome to see Bastille cooking with gas, because the final duel between Archides and Bastille is awesome. And again, like, Sanderson has some gas that he can turn on only when he's writing fight scenes, because
True.
His endings and his fight scenes are so much stronger than everything else. And, like, to bring that up a little bit, it's weird that... No, actually, I'll bring that up at a later point. But again, like, we get to see Bastille being really cool, but also at the same time, it's like, I'm sorry you had to push yourself in this way, because I wish someone had said to you at any point, you are enough. You are more than enough.
And again, it's kind of like that parallel thing where it's like, she's desperately looking for validation somewhere, and, like, the only place she's really finding it is in Alcatraz again.
Yeah.
Like, the two of them are really all they got, because their parents are so caught up in their like narcissistic ways that they think the entire world, like they can't fathom the world from their kid's perspective. And I mean, to me it kind of seems parallel with like Attica, where I'm like, I feel like Drulin also has mommy issues, where like Bastile's grandmother probably was like insanely harsh on her too, and it's like no one's breaking the cycle here. We're all just like treating our kids in the poor ways that like we were treated. And like obviously that's not confirmed or anything, but that's just like how I feel like she's being written.
The secondary theme of this book is generational trauma.
Yeah.
And I'm honestly so into it. Okay, wild comparison to bring up now, but like I watched the first 5 seasons of My Hero Academia as it was coming out, and there's a lot wrong with that show for sure. But the reason I kept watching it is because the whole generational trauma like is the theme of that show, and I was so into it. It was like, here's this world that really sucks, and like the reason the main characters are struggling the way they are is because of all the problems left behind from the heroes one generation up. And I love that theme so much, and it's coming up in Alcatraz now, and I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
So yeah, Drulin, one above Elend. You failed your baby girl. I probably wrote that 10 times in this book. Every time they interact, I said, you failed your baby girl.
We're making our Sanderson character hit list of our...
No, literally.
I have some other beats, unless Taylor, you have another one you want to hit.
I wanted to talk a little bit. Actually, I have something really quick. It's quick to me. I don't know if this will be quick to the group.
Go for it.
But I thought it was very cool how Alcatraz's talent kind of evolved in this book.
Yeah.
There's a kind of throwaway, maybe not throwaway, but like a very brief, just like part of the book where he's like, my talent feels like it's alive. Like it feels like it's a beast.
Yeah.
That has like opinions. And I was like,
I
did note, like, and he says specifically like, oh, it never works on Bastille. And I was like, oh, your talent also likes Bastille. Like your talent is alive and it likes Bastille, so it lets Bastille do what she wants.
And also he uses his talent in a couple of different unique ways. Like he uses at one point to silence a crowd by breaking the sound barrier.
Oh, that reminds me. Did it come up in book 2 that the reason the Forgotten Language is the way it is because Alcatraz the First broke the language?
No.
Like
I don't think
they just dropped that in this book as a piece of information in a very throwaway, remember this thing that we learned last time book.
Right.
But I went back and looked. I don't think that comes up in book 2.
It does
like,
not. That is so cool.
It's like something that got cut and Sanderson forgot it got cut. But like it makes sense, it tracks, but it's like, oh, that was never said out loud, that the reason the Forgotten Language is the way it is because Alcatraz the First broke the language. Which is awesome, by the way, which is super cool.
Great detail. And again, like, I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes on, because we see Alcatraz the First around his coffin has broken time.
Right, yeah.
So it's going to be cool to see.
And it's obviously called the Dark Talent.
Oh,
there's something evil about it.
Here's the line I found from that like scene where he's like thinks of it as something alive. When I'd been young, I thought of my talent as a curse. Now I'd begun thinking of it as some kind of wild superpower. This was the first time, however, that I thought of it as something foreign inside of me.
Yeah.
Scary.
And then that, and then like that thought comes, and then not much later in the book is like that's kind of close to the end of the book. And then at the end of the book, Attica's like, and now I'm going to give Smedry talents to everybody. And that's kind of like we still don't really know what these are. And it kind of reminded us that like...
That's why I think he's going to be the villain.
Yeah, we kind of learned that, like, we kind of learned from Alcatraz the First that, like, wait, the whole, like, Smedry talents are kind of cool now, but they were actually, like, a problem. They were actually something that, like, broke the world.
Yeah.
In some way. They're dangerous.
Yeah, and also it's nice to see
silly, and then they get dangerous.
It's nice to see Alcatraz like get better with his talent. Like he's using it in a bunch of like creative ways. And again, this is Sanderson at his best to me, is thinking of creative ways for the magic system to interact with stuff that we hadn't thought about it interacting with before. If there is one thing that Sanderson can do that another author could not do, it's that shit.
Mm-hmm. No, we came up in the last book, but magical mystery is my favorite part of one of my favorite parts of all of Brandon Sanderson's writings. Like, we had a lot of it last book, and I said it before, but like I was actually we talked a lot about it, like the weird politics and the racialization and all that stuff of the books. That was like the first 2/3 of the books is like very standard high fantasy courts and queens and parties and all that stuff. I was bored out of my mind. I could not have given less of a crap about that entire part of the book. And then we got to the Royal Archives, where they find the book that's like on the origin of Smedry talents, and immediately I was locked in, and immediately I was interested again, and like wanted to keep reading.
It's funny that you say that, because like as soon as the magic became like more scientific and more like a typical Brandon Sanderson magic system, I stopped caring. Like immediately, I was just like, yeah, okay.
I love the like. Here we have this. I love the bit of there's this magic system that we understand one way, and then as the story goes on, we learn actually it does not work the way we thought it worked. I eat that up every time. I ate it up in Mistborn. I'm going to eat it up when we get back to Stormlight, like, or get to it.
I literally wrote in. There's a chapter beginning that made me think like there's always another secret from Mistborn. Seems to just literally be his writing philosophy, his like modus operandi. Is like there's always another secret.
And like
100%.
I hope it remains that way, because I think the least satisfying version of Sanderson's like Cosmere is all the secrets are eventually filled in.
I know we've critiqued him before in the sense that he, like you said often that like sometimes feels like he feels the need to explain everything. That is kind of true, but at the same time, there is always another secret. Like I don't actually believe he's ever going to explain everything. He explains a lot, but every time he explains something, it just create 5 more questions.
And we'll see. I mean, again, I still think he tends to over-explain certain things. Like, to me, there is no answer as interesting to me as a mystery. Don't get me wrong, there can be very satisfying answers to mysteries, but there is no answer as interesting as a question. And that holds true to me broadly for fiction. And again, that is a matter of taste, but worth bringing up because, again, this whole thing is about us being critics. Shout out Folsom for being a critic. We love to see it. He's a real one. Folsom. He's our only representation. At least in this. I guess that is a running joke with Folsom, is he is a literary critic, but also a critic of everything. So
like he'll just be like I give that 4 out of 7.5.
Yeah. Like, he's like, I give this party 4 wine glasses out of 5. But I give the hors d'oeuvres 1.5 out of 5. That sort of thing. It's cute. It's a fun running bit.
Just like
although when it does get into like a more broader idea about like what criticism is, I think that's sort of interesting, because that's definitely Sanderson reflecting on like criticism of his work, which like again, as far as I'm concerned, is fine. It's a fun little beat. It's not very much more than that. I wanted it to be more than that so we could have a conversation about criticism and like be very self-focused on ourselves for a second, but like there really isn't that much in the book about criticism apart from like Sanderson briefly acknowledging criticism, and what I think is nice, acknowledging that it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. It's important, but also it's like sometimes people don't want to be criticized.
Yes.
Sometimes people aren't looking for that.
Which again, like if you're putting that into a kid's book, that's a perfectly fine lesson.
Which, Brandon Sanderson, if you don't want your books criticized, I'm sorry, we are going to ignore you in this case.
Yes.
Love your books, by the way, if you're listening.
Bit too late for that.
Speaking of criticism, do we have any other particular points? Because I have one minor point that is like a thing I don't love.
I think I've said pretty much everything I really want to get to.
other than I really feel for Alcatraz on being completely oblivious on the whole them in love thing. And actually, I do want to say real quick my whole reaction to it. So the whole bit was like, Folsom and Himalaya, they like fall for each other, and Alcatraz. The thing is, it was so obvious that they were into each other that I misunderstood why Alcatraz was distrustful of Himalaya. I thought it was just him going down you can't ever trust a librarian. But then it reiterated that the reason he distrusts Himalaya is because Folsom's spending so much time with her. And the only reason he would do that is if he still distrusted Himalaya. Like, the only reason Folsom's spending all this time. And I completely misunderstand that. I completely missed that was his reasoning. Because it was so obvious to me that they were into each other. Yeah. That I was like, there's no way that could be Alcatraz's reason for distrusting Himalaya.
There's also a fantastic beat later on in the book where Alcatraz is talking to Folsom and Himalaya. It's like, well, now it's so obvious that they're into each other. Why don't they just talk about it? And then he literally does the exact same thing with Bastille in that scene where they're not talking about the fact that they're both clearly interested in each other. And it's so fucking funny.
Yeah. Or Bastille giving him shit when he tries to tell Himalaya that Folsom actually likes her.
Yeah, that's the scene I'm talking about. Is he's specifically like, well, why don't they just talk about it again with Bastille? Is so fucking funny.
Yeah. My girlfriend Maddie recently introduced me to the idea of idiots to lovers. which I should say she used as a way to describe us, like me and her. And I think that applies to this book too.
That applies to you two very well. Yeah. Let's talk about something else.
I had just a point, but it was, again, not really a point about this book, but more a point about the series so far. So the three of us, we went to the Library of Congress National Book Festival this year. And we sat in an attempt to see Rebecca Yarros, we sat in on multiple different panels so that we could, because people were a little bit crazy
for those who stuck to the very end, you heard some of our live commentary from the National Book Fair.
Because this panel was done by librarians, they mentioned, please remind me, who was the two men that went before?
That would be the duo known as James S.A. Corey. Let me get their real names. Daniel Abraham and Ty Franick.
So the librarian that was interviewing them talked about how they made their librarians or scribes evil. And then when Rebecca Yarros was up there was a comment like, thank you for not making the scribes evil, or something like that. Like, thank you for not making the librarians evil. And so I kind of just wanted to talk about fantasy as a genre, and I was interested in hearing what you guys kind of, like, is Sanderson playing off of fantasy stereotypes? Because that is something that I found out by going to this book con that I didn't think of before.
I have never encountered librarians or archivists as evil in a particular, I don't think of that as a fantasy stereotype.
Not as a trend. I think I've seen there be evil archivists, but never as a.
No, I would not say that's broadly overall reflective of a genre trope. And it's worth noting that the folks writing The Expanse are writing science fiction, and it's a very particular faction that's evil and stuff like that.
In fact, I'd say overall librarians and archivists are always predicted generally as the good guys.
And again, a lot of this is sort of interesting. And I think part of the reason that comment the librarian made to Rebecca Yarros rings so true is not necessarily, librarians being evil is a stereotype, but librarians being demonized is definitely a thing that's happening right now in the real world. I mean, there are constant book bans. There are constant, these people are evil. They're, all these horrible things. They're murderers. They're exposing children to pornography. And, all of these things. And it's actually, they're just librarians doing their job in 99.99999% of cases.
This might be the Hushlander propaganda speaking, but in the real world, librarians, heroes, great people.
Librarians are fucking awesome.
But that might just be my Hushlander upbringing, the propaganda getting to me.
Also, it like, I truly, one of the funniest things is my type is librarian, apparently, because of the like 5 people that I've dated like very seriously, 4 of them became librarians.
Graham.
No, that tracks.
Yeah.
No, that might be one of the least surprising things I've heard you say.
One of them was a journalist, and then the other 4 were librarians.
Graham would be the Smedry falling in love with the librarian.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. And like, for the record, I have dated people with different professions. It's just like none of them lasted very long.
Speaking of, though, that's a really great point, and I'm glad you brought that up. Speaking of, there was one piece of advice that I don't think aged very well, where the Alcatraz was making the point in the beginning of the chapter to question experts and question people with college degrees.
That kind of hurt.
And I was
in
like,
2024 to hear that.
Yeah, I was like, maybe that worked in 2009. Doesn't work now.
2024, less than a month ahead of the 2024 election to read that.
Again, I mean, like, I understand what it's going for. And, like, what it's going for, I think, is good. Like, questioning authority, I think, is still good. However, yes, in the current year where expertise is so devalued, it's so... Mm-hmm. It's so, like, it hits different in an upsetting way.
Yeah, where they're like, oh, actually, all of the... everything that the experts say, like, they just, like, what do they have? A college degree? What do they know? Like, that's kind of like that was the tone that was, like, used in this book, where I was like, ugh, that ideology has led to some bad things in the last 4 years.
Yeah. And again, like, I completely am on the book side of, like, question authority, like, even sometimes question expertise, but also acknowledge that people can know more than you.
Yeah, question expertise means critically examine where that expertise is coming from, not distrust people for being an expert.
Yes, exactly. A good thing to question expertise of, question our expertise. That would be something like critically examine where our thought process is.
Exactly, right? Like, we're not the arbiters of these are our opinions about Brandon Sanderson's books based on our experience and our opinions on, like, literature and stuff. In fact, it's kind of offensive to experts to even call me an expert. I just like Brandon Sanderson books. And I found a way to trick 2 of my best friends into reading more of them.
Exactly.
That was my... I think through with
your main points?
My notes. Yeah, that was what I wanted to talk about. So, Graham, I'm riveted to see.
Well, this is just a minor last point, but it is sort of one of these things where I'm just like, this sucks to see. Where did all the fat phobia come from in this book? Because it definitely wasn't in the first book where they were talking about Sing.
That happened because he started leaning a little more into the Harry Potter stuff. And so, of course, with that
I mean, maybe. Okay, so 2 things. One, for the record, like, Sing's fatness is brought up a ton in this book in a way where it is disparaging, where in the first book, his fatness is brought up as, like, a superpower, as part of his tripping. And, like, it's still talked about in this way, but it's more disparaging in this book. There's also,
I noticed as well.
There's another point in the book where the only time Leavenworth Smedry has ever been shown to be afraid of anything is of his daughter, who's a fat lady. And, like, she comes up and tries to give him a hug, and he's, like, terrified of that.
I noticed that as well, and I thought, because when we were talking about Scrivener's Bone, Taylor, you made the excellent point that, like, the first time we meet a woman Smedry, her superpower is waking up ugly, and then the next time we meet a woman Smedry, her superpower is being really annoying.
Yes. Or her power is saying, like, awkward things.
She doesn't come up that much in the book, but her talent is saying the worst thing at an inappropriate time.
Yes.
Is like her.
Right.
And she uses that to, like, distract people because, like, or, like, make them discomfort or, like, whatever.
And again, the only adjective Sing gets is his, like, fatness in this book, which is weird because, again, like, I think of Sing in the first book. What was that?
It did come out of nowhere, is what I'm
saying. In the first book, I think of Sing, like, yeah, his fatness is a part of it. And I'm, like, again, like, it's not wrong to portray a character as fat, but it's weird to bring it up as disparaging. Because, like, I think of Sing as, like, this weird badass professor wielding Tommy guns. That's awesome. So, again, to, like, only highlight his sort of awkwardness and fatness in this one is odd. And also, at this point, we get Sing's height and weight in this book. And also, when hearing that, I was like, well, Brandon Sanderson clearly doesn't know anything about fatness, because I want you, or actually I'll put it in general, but I want you, the listener at home, to look up a photo of the wrestler Charles Wright. Charles Wright is a wrestler, and because he's a wrestler, we have his stats. He's 6'6" and 300 pounds. Sing is, and if you look at a photo of him, he's not fat. Now, granted,
also Sing was 6 foot. Wasn't it 6'8"? Like, I thought it was even taller. Like, it was.
Maybe it's even taller than that. But if you're like really, really tall and in shape, like not even in shape. I mean, Sing is probably in shape because again, he has warrior's lenses. He's a fighter, at least on some level. 300 pounds is not going to look like 300 pounds
when you're that tall. Like,
yeah, absolutely. So again, it's just weird. And like, again, it's weird to talk about like specific weights and heights of a character. I don't want to do this, but I mean, like, the fat phobia is in this book. I don't know. Have you talked to a fat person, Brandon? Like, because this is not, it doesn't really seem right. And again, look at that man. That man is a full 30 pounds heavier than Sing.
Whenever I'm trying to imagine like Sing's body type, I just imagine Jean Tannen from Lies of Locke Lamora.
Oh, sure. I picture, I mean, because it's leaning into the stereotype, I picture, where's the photo of Kamehameha the Great where he's wearing a business suit? And then, like, here's the photo I think of when I'm picturing Sing. Obviously, he looks very different, but that is of Kamehameha the Great. Like, in a business suit. And it's like, again, that's just a normal man. So, yeah, I was not a fan of the fat phobia. I don't know why it's here. Because Sanderson, I mean, he's done a little bit of that sort of thing before, but it's just weird to have in it here. Okay. Oh, one other thing I wanted to talk about. The very beginning of this book, I did not care for, as in the opening chapter, because why is this book using the same exact plot beat as the one of the cooler points in the second one? Because like
a big crystal thing. And,
yeah, they're flying in a giant crystal bird, and the bird fucking explodes, and they crash to the ground and are ultimately fine. And it's like, why are you reusing this plot beat? Come up with something new. They don't have to crash land.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point was to get us suspicious of Darulin.
I guess, yeah.
You could have done that in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I mean, to me, knowing the ending, that was the whole point of it.
Yeah.
Was to be like, oh, Darulin.
Yeah, it was set up as a big mystery, and then it kind of only marginally mattered.
Oh, yeah, I mean, they immediately forgot it, and then, like, halfway through, they were like, remember, I didn't forget that. And we were like, I think you did, though. Just mentioning it here. Again, I think that Sanderson, deadass, wrote this in his notes app. Like, I love that. I love that it has a very notes app quality, where it's like, whatever came to mind was what happened.
Yeah. The only other thing that I probably want to bring up, I was reading the book at 2:30 in the morning. It was very rude of the book to then call me out for reading late, because that's a thing that happens in the book.
Or the book calling you out directly for skipping books in the series. Mr. I skipped Words of Radiance straight to Oathbringer.
Yeah. Again, I don't do this all the time. I was just like, but then again, that's a good transition point for Wheel of Time.
Well, the book also said, remember, that the main characters always lose in the middle book.
And then they didn't really. That's why
they didn't really?
That's why my theory for what was going to happen was that Alcatraz was going to get left behind. And then like his hero moment was he was going to do something to let his like friends get out, like escape from the librarian control. But then he was going to be stuck behind. And I started to get really excited about that idea, that when it didn't happen, I was actually disappointed. Even though I completely invented that as a thing that was going to happen.
Well, I was just going to say, isn't Wind and Truth like book 5 out of 10?
5 out of 10.
Out, y'all.
It's
but
5 out of...
Walton also told me that it's like 2 different arcs.
Yes.
It's there's meant to be a significant time, but I think like decade in the decades realm time skip between 5 and 6 of Stormlight Archive and the like primary focus character. It's supposed to be like a new cast of primary focus characters. The focus characters of the front 5 are not necessarily going to not be there, but they're going to be like more in the background.
Well, I will be looking out for book 3 and see if that's, and for the rest of these, see if they lose in the middle book, because that seems to be something that he thinks should happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happened in Well of Ascension. She let out Ruin. The book ended with her letting out Ruin.
Yeah.
That's true.
But yeah, I think my only other point, and this isn't really a thing to talk about, but or I mean, maybe there's some interesting conversation, but there's a lot more. This book leans a little harder into the in a way that can only be done by someone that's such a strong outliner that Brandon Sanderson is. Stephen King, George R.R. Martin, those are all by the seat of their pants writers. Those are guys that just kind of fucking write, just go forward. While Brandon Sanderson is like, he has this 10-book Stormlight Archive series, he already has the ending of book 10 plotted out, and like it's all already outlined out to a degree. Mm-hmm. And I think that leads to some kind of fun stuff that in book 3 he can just confidently put down on the page, yeah, this thing's going to happen in book 5. Just have that be in the narration. I just thought that was kind of neat. And it's a thing you can only really do if you're like a strong outliner like Brandon Sanderson is.
Yeah.
He might not have had the idea he probably wasn't even greenlit for the entire series in book 1, but he did talk about how the entire series opens up with the, I think, climax of the 5th book.
Yeah, presumably.
Which, something to be said there.
Yeah.
Good for him. I feel like I am ready and prepared to start talking about our next few months.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyone else have anything else to say?
I think I said everything I need to say about Alcatraz, at least for now. But wait, before we do that, just real quick, would we recommend it? I mean, I know this is book 3 of a series, but like,
go read The Scrivener's Bones.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to remember this book as one of the weaker Alcatraz books, except for the ending. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, my opinion of this book is elevated by the fact that I like the ending so much. I like the ending so much, but most of the book I'm kind of meh on. So, like, I wouldn't be excited to reread this book if I'm doing like a reread of the series.
An alternative one-sentence summary that I almost gave was that like this was just exposition, the book. I found myself in so much of this book being like, okay, we are back to exposition, and we are talking about a lot of things that are setting up for the last 2 books. And that's what was boring, is because it was it was not anything, nothing was happening, and we were just being fed kind of things that we need to know. Probably for the next 2 books, probably to make sense.
Pretty telling that the first book that we actually get to the magical otherworld is the most boring of them.
Yeah. Again, there's a sauce there in like interactions with the real world, like the fantasy world interaction with the real world, that is in something like Harry Potter, that's in something like Percy Jackson and the Olympians, that like I wish it leaned into in a non-racialized way. But again, like I'm less interested in the complete fantasy world.
Yeah.
Taylor, can I ask a favor?
What's up?
Can you take a photo of the duel between Archides and Bastille, just because I would like to read that passage on the podcast before we switch over?
Sure. There's also an image.
Oh, yeah. I would love to see the image.
Listen, for any Magic the Gathering fans out there, I am obsessed with all of the art regarding Benalia, which is a place in Magic the Gathering, where it's knights where like stained glass is incorporated into like their armor and weapons and stuff, and I am eternally obsessed with that aesthetic.
So the whole duel is about 3 pages, but the thing I wanted to hit was the massive knight and the spindly girl circled, their swords beating against each other as if in a prescribed rhythm. The weapons seemed things of beauty, the way they reflected light. two people trying to kill each other with rainbows. Bastille should have lost. She was smaller, weaker, and exhausted. Yet each time Archytas threw her down, she scrambled back to her feet and attacked with even more fury and determination. To the side, her father, the king, watched in awe. To my surprise, I saw her mother sit. The woman looked dazed and sick, but she seemed to have regained enough consciousness to open her eyes. And then, like, she brings the sword to his neck and all that. But, like, just that little moment right there is, like, Sanderson leading into a kind of prose he doesn't normally lean into. And I'm like, man, why don't you? You're good at this, actually. It's disappointing to me that your prose is so devoid of that kind of description normally. Because, like, if you're good at it and you can do it in a fight scene, you can do it in other points of the book. And, like, you know, I've read a lot this week, and it's just sort of like, I really love when the language of the book itself is incredibly good and novelistic in a way where it's not just, like, transparent to the reader, and, like, there is some work being done there. And it's like, I wish there was more of this from Sanderson, because this is a great scene.
He's great at fight scenes. He's great at, you love to see the little guy win.
I think we can kind of move into the end. Rankings?
Oh yeah.
It's gonna be interesting. Let me consult our Instagram to see my rankings.
We can do rankings, and then we can do talking about the next couple books, and then we can wrap up. And I'm starving, and I need to eat food. Actually, you might have noticed me step away and get, like, a microwave sandwich because I made the mistake of taking my ADHD medication, having not eaten at all today, and I suddenly got very nauseous in the middle of our recording.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
I didn't expect it to hit that hard that fast.
Honestly,
but yeah.
I put the Knights of Crystallia third to last, above the first book in this series, which I thought didn't know. I still think that the first book in the series didn't know what it wanted to do and was trying too hard to subvert middle grade expectations in a way that didn't work. So I do think it's better than that book, and then obviously Poo-Poo Well of Ascension, that I would be surprised if anything went below that.
I think if there's anything I'm expecting. Oh, there's one thing I'm expecting to go below Well of Ascension.
But
yeah. I don't think that this list will be the same in that time, because I think one of the things that we should probably do is our rankings for the year is what it should be. And when we get to our 13th book, we should start a new list for that year.
Okay.
And then maybe at the end of the project, we do one massive list where we rank all 50 whatever of these books. But I think if at the end of every episode we have to go through a, like, 30 plus rankings, it will just get very messy.
I have, like, I have my own document for book rankings, so I'll probably keep ranking them, but I agree that it will probably get pretty long.
Yeah.
Okay.
My ranking's gonna be very similar to Taylor's. Mine's also third for last, above the first Alcatraz and above Well of Ascension. Don't need to say anything about Well of Ascension. Although my reasoning for the first book is a little different than Taylor's, in that I actually think this book is kind of similar to the first book in a more extreme way. Because the first book I also remember being kind of meh about until we started to get to the climax, and then I was really excited. This book is that to a more extreme end, where I think I dislike the beginning 2/3 of the book more than I dislike the beginning 2/3 of the first book, but I like the last third so much more than I like the last third of the first book.
That's a good way to put it.
It's very much it's the same general issue I have with the first book, just more extremified.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. And it's also, like, one of Sanderson's, like, things is his endings are always the strongest parts of his books. They cook so much more. And I'm wondering if that's I brought up the point on the Warbreaker episode that Vivenna's ending is so strong that it sort of overwrites some of the problems I had with her arc in the book itself. And oftentimes I feel like Sanderson gets away with some stuff where it's like, this book was too long or it wasn't edited well because the ending is so strong that everyone's like, well, yeah, all that matters is how you start and how you end in some respects. You can disregard the middle, because as long as you nail those two, those are the things that people are going to remember.
The opposite of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Game of Thrones, there's one book that has a fucking killer opening and a killer ending, and that's the middle one. What's it called?
Storm of Swords.
Thank you. Also, for listeners at home, Jack would like to pretend that he doesn't know everything about Game of Thrones. He was not a huge Game of Thrones fan, but he absolutely was. I remember you in high school.
I read those books when I was 12. Thank you very much.
Well, you were rereading them in high school, too.
I was just reading them in high school, yeah.
I distinctly remember you coming up to me in biology class in freshman year, and you had come up to me, and it was me and I'm going to bleep those names, but you came up to the three of us, and we're talking specifically about the scene in A Clash of Kings where Tyrion goes, "Those are brave men knocking on our door, let's go kill them." And we had this conversation in biology class, I believe while I was playing The Witcher 3 instead of doing my assignment. Actually, no, it was The Witcher 2. It was The Witcher 2. Because I had moved on.
Not actually.
Oh my god.
My memory is weird. It's weird that all of that is still there.
Regardless, okay, Graham, your ranking, however.
Hero of Ages, Warbreaker, Alcatraz versus the Scrivener's Bones, Elantris, Mistborn, Alcatraz versus the Knights of Crystallia, Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians, The Well of Ascension.
I like how we all have the same final three.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do we all have Warbreaker number 1?
No, I have Hero of Ages.
Oh, you have
1.
Hero of Ages, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Warbreaker is very good, but again, nothing hits in Warbreaker like that last third of Hero of Ages. And again, the first 2/3 of Hero of Ages, I don't really care for. But that last third is so strong that it undoes everything I dislike about it. And it's like, God damn it, unfortunately you are good at this when you really set to it.
Well, the Hero of Ages has Ellen, so...
Yeah.
Okay, just keeping things moving. What's the next book we're reading?
Yeah, Graham. What's the next book we're reading?
Okay. The next book we're reading is Towers of Midnight by Robert Jordan. Oh, no, it's not. It's The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan. Jesus. We're reading The Gathering Storm, which is...
by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson.
Yes. As we've discussed previously, Brandon Sanderson was a big fan of Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan had a very rare blood disease that caused him to die tragically young, and because of this,
Jordan... wasn't sudden either, he knew it was coming.
Yes. Robert Jordan and his widow chose Brandon Sanderson as the successor. He trained with Robert Jordan, he studied his notes, and finished the last 3 books after his death. And those books are The Gathering Storm, which we'll be reading in November, Towers of Midnight, which we'll be reading in January, and then we get a break all the way up until July, and then we're reading the 15th or 14th, depending on how you count, and final book, A Memory of Light.
What?
So I guess actually The Gathering Storm is the 11th book? Yeah. It's the 11th or 12th, depending on how you count.
Which, we talked about it a little bit, but Graham has been suffering on the cross by reading every single Wheel of Time book.
And I have some news to report. I will not be able to read every single Wheel of Time book before our thing in November. And it's not a thing of I am physically incapable of doing it. If I really set my mind to it, I could. But genuinely, I am not enjoying these books so much that it has been detrimental to my health to at certain points to read these books. And again, if you really like these books, this is not a diss at you. I don't want to seem like I am coming for this thing that you like, but for something, and it's not even the book itself is making me mad. It's the fact that I am not enjoying it so much, and being in that state constantly in my free time is just not good for me.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, I will have all 14 done by the time that we read A Memory of Light. But for The Gathering Storm, realistically, what I can promise the listeners is I will have the first 7. I will skip several books and make it all the way to... Oh, and also, I will know what happened. I will do as much research as I can. I will read summaries, but I won't have read through the entire books.
Yeah, my plan is like the only Wheel of Time I've read so far is I've read like the first third of the very first book, Eye of the World. I'm planning to just like read the plot summaries of each book.
Jack, I know that's your plan. I would prefer if you didn't.
Okay, just go into a completely blind.
I'm planning. I literally have no clue what the Wheel of Time is about, and I am not planning on looking at summaries.
Well, I think that would be like a good. The reason I would want you to go in completely blind is because, well, Taylor should go in completely blind regardless, because that's sort of this whole project.
Yeah, that's true.
But for Jack, I would like you to go in with basically the knowledge you have about the Wheel of Time right now, which is very little. Like, you know who Rand is, and that's about it. And like you might know some character names and loosely who these map onto in terms of Lord of the Rings. But not to like make myself the expert, but like I would rather you were coming to me for that as opposed to getting an idea of what happened in a previous book through a summary or something like that.
Interesting.
That's fair.
I do want to call out a little bit because because doing it this way, where at least two of us have not even read the preceding books, and we're about to do like essentially a review and a critical analysis of book 11 of a series where we haven't read the first 10 books. It is a little odd, and I don't fault anyone who thinks that's a little like what standing do we have to kind of make these critiques. If you feel that way, that's perfectly valid. I think the approach we're planning to take is we're here to try and understand Brandon Sanderson as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
So we're reading something he wrote, and that's going to probably be a weakness of our critique of the Wheel of Time books, is that we won't have all the context. And I'm kind of curious what that's going to look like, because I'm, unlike Graham, I don't usually skip books in a series. So so this will be wild for me to read these books and try to be like, I don't know what's happening. I'm trying to understand.
Okay, Jack, here's the compromise that I will let you have. I don't want you to look up anything ahead of time, but if you go, this doesn't make sense to me, you can ask me or look up a summary for what does this mean.
Okay.
But I don't want you to look this up ahead of time.
Yes, chef.
And yeah, and like again, I am not a fan of the Wheel of Time in a way that many people are. Also, I just want to shout out that, again, if someone has bounced off the Wheel of Time before, whether that's the audiobook or the main book, I highly recommend the audiobooks narrated by Rosamund Pike, who plays Moraine in the television show, and she does a fantastic job as narrator. It's really a stupendous audiobook. Yeah, so I just want to shout out that version in particular. She's done the first 4 books at this point. That's the main things that we wanted to talk about when in terms of the Wheel of Time. And again, this is a weird way to go about it, as Jack said, but I think that this is the way that makes sense for this show. Because again, I want to see how Wheel of Time changes Brandon Sanderson. I'm not really interested in the Wheel of Time as its own work, or at least that's how I feel about relating it to this.
Yeah. I will say, like, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I'm definitely the friend is like, what are you watching? And oh, you're in season 3? Like, put it on. Let's just watch it. Like, I don't, and then I'm not like the kind of person who like needs everything explained, or like, and if like the person next to me is like, oh, this is what happened, I'll be like, oh, like, cool. But I'm also like, I'm not necessarily going to like ask questions about what's going on, because I'm like enjoying the mystery of like, oh, I actually have no clue what's going on. Let's see what they do with that. Like let's see what the vibe is, and like who I'm supposed to think like this person is based on their current characterization or stuff like that. So like I feel like I'm going to be very comfortable coming in at book 11 is what I should say. Like I feel like that's not going to be like a frustration for me. I'm going to be like, this is weird and strange. I have no clue what's going on. Vibes. Like that's vibes for me.
Yeah.
Like maybe by the end I'll know something that's going on. That's also a vibe.
All right. Any final thoughts before we are...
I think I'm going to start...
We're done.
I am worried about Way of Kings, and I think I'm going to begin it before we record our next podcast.
That's wise. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was planning on rereading it like a while ago because I wanted to reread all the books on the lead up to book 5 coming out in December, but you know what? I'll live if I don't read book 5 right away. I am reading the preview chapters, which that would be a thing to talk about, like the practice of doing preview chapters. anyway, but that could be for a later
I mean, preview
episode.
chapters in general are not uncommon, but I think the fact that Brandon Sanderson puts out the first third of his book, like, fully, before...
Free, online.
For free, online, before every book comes out, is, like, interesting practice. And again, these are, like, 1,200-page novels, or at least...
First third's a lot.
First third is...
I think it's been said that for Wind and Truth, it's just going to be the first quarter, which is different. Like, the last couple were first third. This one's doing just first quarter.
But again, that's still a novel. That's 300 pages.
It's very
That's
clear.
longer than the Alcatraz book.
It's very clear to me that Sanderson loves his readers and loves this industry. He was the reason why he was like, basically like, you can't have my Stormlight, or like what I heard was that you can't have my Stormlight books unless you change the Audible like structure for everyone.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
It's very clear that, I don't know, that he really loves his people.
I mean, we've critiqued Brandon Sanderson as his depiction of things, but I generally think Brandon Sanderson's a good, well-meaning guy that loves what he's doing, and it's the most interesting part of this project to me is seeing how he learns and changes and grows, because where this guy writes so much, and it's over the course of like almost 3 decades, so
yeah,
there's a lot of change to happen.
Not almost 3, just barely, not even 2 yet.
Well, I guess, yeah, maybe. No, wait. Oh, because he published.
Yeah, okay, 2005. So a decade next year. Or 2 decades next
year. Keep reading.
Grab a book.
Grab a book, hit the beach.
Grab a book, hit the beach.
See you guys next month. A Grain of Sanderson is created by Graham Gillman, Taylor Lane, and Jack McLaughlan. I edit and produce the show. Our logo is by our very talented friend Ben Busby. Our theme music is Goodnight Kiss by Too Mellow off the album Midnight Broadcasts. You can find their work at twomellow.net, that's the number 2, MELLO, and Too Mellow Makes at bandcamp.com. If you'd like to support the Beachcombers further, you can do that in the following ways. First, please tell your friends about this podcast. Sharing the pod in a Discord, writing a thoughtful post on social media, or otherwise telling your friends really helps us out. You can also support us by following us on social media. Taylor works very hard on our Instagram. Or by buying a book from our bookshop, of which we see a small cut. Both those links are in the episode description. Questions, critiques, encouragement? Please write us an email at agrainofsanderson@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening.
I am definitely like, I mean, we should probably talk about this at the end a little bit more, but I'm definitely buckling up for the next 3 months of books we're reading, which is A Wheel of Time, Way of Kings, and then another Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
Ooh, oh god.
Like, strap in, guys.
Luckily, that's all happening right when I'm getting my winter break.
Yeah.
So I can put aside my case briefs to read fantasy books instead.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about reading Way of Kings because I've already read it like 3 times. I know I can read that book like in a weekend just because I like it so much and I've reread it a couple times.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah. But
I mean that was one of the sort of
Wheel of Time is what I'm worried about. Wheel of Time I'm worried about.
Wheel of Time will be interesting. That was one of the things I noticed where I'll talk about this a bit at the end, but I took a break a bit from reading some of the Wheel of Time books, and I picked up one of my favorite books, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is about the length of a Wheel of Time book. And like I've been kind of cruel to myself for this past year of like, I'm not getting through these Wheel of Time books fast enough. I'm a slow reader. I've lost it. And I finished Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell in 2 days, and then I tried to go back to a Wheel of Time book, and like each one has taken me like a week and a half at least. It's been rough. Anyway, we'll get to that at the end.
I'm sneaking this into the recording while the others aren't here. But if you're listening to this, if Graham doesn't take this out on the cutting room floor, buy gold. Bury the gold.
Every time I read these books, I'm convinced I'm a Smedry.
Yeah. We need to readdress that question though, because at the first book we were like, what would your Smedry talent be?
No, I keep waiting for my Smedry talent, spilling almost every drink I have, to come up. But like genuinely, I think I'm a Smedry because the amount that I spill everything that has ever graced my hands is like ridiculous. Like I feel like that's a really good Smedry talent. Like I keep waiting for my representation. Like where's the me in these books?
I think my smedgery talent of forgetting things. Mine. The thing is, spilling drinks and forgetting things are definitely two things I can very much see showing up in the book.
Right, yeah. Spilling... Yeah. Well, it's not even just spilling drinks, it's really... Drinks are the main one because they're the most annoying to clean up, but, like, food, like, everything.
Yeah. Well, that I can very much see. Well, I'm trying to think of, like, how that would show up in a book. I imagine it'd be very similar to Sing's tripping, where it's like you spill a drink that was actually poison. Like...
Yeah.
My forgetting things would just be like, I can't go crazy from the eldritch horrors because I just forget them. That's how my smedgery talent saves the day.
True.
Graham, what's your smedgery talent?
We had this conversation in the first episode we did.
I know, and I don't remember. I know that's what we're talking about, but I don't remember what you said for yours.
I can't remember what I said for mine either.
It might be wait. Yours could be having a terrible sleep schedule.
Oh, I think that literally was it. Like my sleep schedule is just like unbelievable. Yeah. Also, it's quite funny that Jack says that like his talent is forgetting things, because it is true. Because twice this month I have sent Jack a meme, and then like a week later he has sent it to me as like a different, like he's discovered it from a different place and sent it to me. Or
don't worry about it. Or
most recently, you put in our scheduling channel, hey, look at the Brazilian cover for Warbreaker, as if this was not the art that you shared with us during our Warbreaker episode.
Listen, that's the real magic of these middle grade books. It's teaching the kids that their weird idiosyncrasies and like weird habits or things they might be embarrassed about actually is just a superpower.
Actually, based on that, your smedgery talent might be mispronouncing things.
Well, I caught that
it's really close to Quentin's.
I caught that like page within the first chapter. I loved it. I was like, oh, he keeps breaking things. Like that was me as a kid. Like I couldn't stop fucking up. Like, I wanted someone who like I could relate to in that way.
You're a bad dancer. You're actually a superhero.
Yeah.
You're always late to things. You're actually a superhero.
Love it.
Like maybe this can transition us back into the. Actually, I'll have to say we're back at some point. But that's one of the things where like, this is definitely going at the end. That's one of the things where, like overall, despite how critical we're being of this book so far, I still think that this would be like a perfectly good series to get for some kids. Like I wouldn't be like sort of like I wouldn't have a caveat there of like recommending Harry Potter these days or something like that.
Yeah. And I do want to say it out loud while we're recording, but yeah, that's actually a big thing I like about this podcast, the way we're doing this, and something I want to clarify is we often are pretty critical of these books as we're reading them, but like for the most part we're enjoying ourselves. Like the being critical isn't a sign that we think these books are like bad and like no one should read them or like are a failure of some kind. Like, we're being critical because we love to explore the implications. We love to dissect it. We want to like break it apart and get to know it better. I think correct me if I'm wrong, I think the only book we've read that's actually been like we all actually dislike this book has been Well of Ascension.
And even you like do not dislike Well of Ascension. It's like mostly me and Taylor.
I'm like, it's mostly I'm just bored by it.
Yeah.
Like it's mostly that I'm just like I don't want to reread it.
Yeah.
Is mostly my thing on it.
I would say Well of Ascension is the one I only like actively dislike. It's sort of like many of these books I would not have chosen to have read, and many of them I would not have finished. Like outside of the context of this podcast. But the only book that I'm like mad I read, I would say is Well of Ascension, so far.
On the other hand though, like the only book that I agree, the only book that I like actively hate is Well of Ascension. But also on the other hand, like the only book that I have put into my personal favorites that I love and would recommend to people is Warbreaker. Like I don't know, there's only one book that I've read so far that I'm like telling people like you have to read this book, it's so good.